Welcome to the Nervous System Care and Healing Podcast, where we talk about how to take care of ourselves in mind, in body, in spirit, while we navigate systems that were designed to keep us dysregulated. I'm your host, Liz, a neurodivergent therapist of color, and I'm really glad that you're here. Hey everyone, welcome. Today's episode is about the perinatal nervous system, what it is, how it differs from a non-perinatal nervous system, and how we can honor the transition of the perinatal portal as the rite of passage that it is, instead of pathologizing the experience, as is often the case in Western medical models. And yes, we do use the word portal here, as well as terms like matrescence and patrescence, because our guest, Paige, brings a transpersonal approach that is grounded in science and also explores beyond the clinical and medical lens to really deeply listen to the wisdom that is inside all of us. So this is a conversation about how taking care of the perinatal nervous system is more than just a list of self-care hacks. It is also about acknowledging where systems fall short, like the lack of paid maternity or paternity leave in the US, and how we might reorganize systems at the social, cultural, and economic levels to truly support people at all stages of life, with impacts that could stretch across generations. This episode is, of course, relevant to anyone navigating the perinatal portal, but it's also relevant to anyone who is invested in the future of humanity and the direction that we are going on this planet. So it's relevant to all of us in some way. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the conversation. So I am excited to introduce our guest for today. I will start by reading her bio. So Paige DiChiara is trained as a therapist, doula, and advanced yoga teacher with a specialization in perinatal mental health and transpersonal experiences. She guides pregnant women through a physical and emotional transformation that eases anxiety and discomfort while activating an unshakable trust within themselves. Paige believes that the health of mothers is directly related to the health of society and the health of the planet. So thank you so much for being here, Paige.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Liz. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. So my first question for everyone is, in a nutshell, could you tell us what drew you to this work and why you do what you do?
So I am drawn to this work both from a blend of personal experience and professional work, but very much largely my lived experience of having two pregnancies, two children, and having this transition into motherhood, which I really thought I knew myself well. I knew my body. I had so many tools. I'd been in self-care, nervous system work for a long time. And everything changed when having children. Tools that used to work for me suddenly weren't working the same way. My body was so different. And I had this deep knowing, this deep feeling that there's got to be more than kind of like the medical system was telling me of going to different doctor's appointments when I was pregnant. I just really had this feeling that something deeper was going on and that pregnancy, motherhood was really a rite of passage, but wasn't being revered or held in that way. So really having my lived experience through that and wanting to hold mothers with that reverence and help them know that there are different tools and ways of being as their bodies change, their nervous system changes. And while it can be scary and unsettling, it's also really miraculous and wonderful and can be a spiritual transpersonal experience as well. And that's where some of my work that I've done before getting pregnant and having children. I worked as a yoga teacher for a long time and have clinical experience working in perinatal mental health. So I was really coming from kind of this East meets West perspective of the medical model that I was living and operating in, as well as some of my more, we'll say, like esoteric teachings from yoga and the doula work that I was trained in.
Wow. Well, that is so beautiful just to hear how you were seeing a way of relating to motherhood and pregnancy and just that portal and transformation in a way that was different from the clinical or medical system, and really bringing in reverence and honoring and like remembering inner wisdom as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. You said it. It's such a portal. That's the word I like to use for it. It's a portal of transformation. Another way I've like to describe motherhood as that rite of passage is there's kind of like this invisible wall that you don't know is there until you've crossed over it. And
Mhm.
that's so much of what my experience was, of just this absolute portal of transformation to a different way of being on the other side of it.
Yeah. And so, could you tell us about the perinatal nervous system? What it is, how would a nervous system function differently when pregnant versus not pregnant?
Mhm. I'll start by kind of defining perinatal too, since we don't always hear that as often. And peri just meaning on the edge of. So around the natal period, that's prenatal, postpartum. I even consider it preconception when people are intentionally conceiving. That's really still part of this perinatal time frame of just relating to the childbearing experience. And
Mhm.
so with your question of how the perinatal nervous system is different than the non perinatal one, I kind of need to bring in a little bit of nuance too, just to say that a lot of nervous system work generally tends to be based on male bodies, which run on kind of a 24-hour hormonal rhythm, where female bodies tend to run on more of a 28-day, roughly 1 month, as you think of your
Mhm.
menstrual cycle, hormone rhythm. Many nervous system studies are just done on men because they're less variable. It leaves out a huge section of the
Yeah.
population. And
Yeah.
so, while not all female bodies choose to reproduce or are in that perinatal period, I think first just stating that kind of baseline that there are these differences in nervous systems biologically, that our hormones are affecting our systems in different ways. So, the perinatal nervous system is affected by a really different influx of hormones.
Mhm.
That when a woman or pregnant person is pregnant, they will produce more estrogen in one pregnancy than they will their entire lifetime otherwise. So, saying that
Wow.
again, a woman produces more estrogen in one pregnancy than the rest of her lifetime otherwise. So, there's
That's
some
intense.
it's really intense, some really massive shifts that are happening here. It is the single largest hormone shift a person can have in their lifetime. This is a really seismic thing happening. And we
Mhm.
can get into some of the details of like how different hormones affect mood and function differently. But I think one of the main things to differentiate, as I did kind of mention, the female nervous system operates differently than a male nervous system, is that female bodies are driven more highly by oxytocin, where male
Mhm.
bodies tend to be more driven by dopamine. Those are sort of like the
Okay.
main hormone functions. And we think about that as being really crucial for parent and child or caregiver child bonding, because oxytocin, being that love hormone, those surges of good, happy feelings help create bonding, which we need healthy bonding for the survival of a child. And really, that kind of goes both ways, so that the caregiver is attached to the child to be invested in this really laborious job of caring for a really helpless human being. And so it
Mhm.
has to kind of go both ways, so that the child knows they're connected to the parent vice versa. And that being really one of the largest hormone shifts that happens. There's
Mhm.
also a lot of different things going on that make the perinatal nervous system less averse to confrontation, which
Hmm.
again makes a lot of sense. It really protects that baby mother bubble. One study has shown that mothers are more attuned to see positive nuance in other people's faces.
Oh,
So,
wow.
just these really like under the surface subconscious things. And
Mhm.
oftentimes we might call this like women's intuition. And it could just
Ah,
be these biological drives that are seeing things in the environment and the surrounding that help them be more attuned to what's going on so that they can be more protective of their body, the baby, whether that's the baby is still growing internally or is out in the world.
wow. That just seems so evolutionarily brilliant, the way that happens. And yeah, I'm just taking this all in, these huge differences between the different genders' nervous systems, but that so many of the clinical studies are based on men's rhythms. But of course
Mhm.
that there's so much nuance that gets missed when we over focus on one section of the population. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because there's little nuggets of this information already out there, but sometimes to me it feels like it misses the larger context of the biological function and the nervous system of what's happening. For example, it's really common to know about food aversion during pregnancy. That's a very common symptom that many folks know about or is talked about at doctor's appointments. And part of that is to be protective to the growing baby. Instead
Mhm.
of eating food that could be potentially spoiled, that would make you sick, that would make the baby sick and risk their health, pregnant folks tend to have a little more food aversion or anxiety tends to be a really
Mhm.
common symptom during pregnancy. I like to say
Mhm.
that worry is the work of pregnancy, and that's
Oh.
actually really okay
Mhm.
because we want to be more aware of our surroundings, our environments, the choices we're making, the folks we spend our time around. Like, there's really this internal feeling of wanting to protect yourself and your baby. And that's a lot of the work that I do with folks during pregnancy is learning how to relate to anxiety or worry in a way that feels productive and healthy rather than overwhelming or debilitating. So, a lot of the work that I do is really just rebranding anxiety
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
really understand that sometimes there's true anxiety that's a message telling you, oh, maybe this isn't a thing I want to engage with, or my intuition, this instinct of my body and system is telling me not to go that way. And yeah, relating to anxiety in a way as a messenger rather than something that could be debilitating.
Mm. And I love how that's so non-pathologizing, where it's really acknowledging that the anxiety, different experiences make sense given the context of what a portal pregnancy and birth are. Yeah, I really love what you said about seeing anxiety as a messenger and something
Mhm.
worth listening to. I guess I'm wondering, like, in whether your personal experiences or in the work that you do with clients supporting pregnant women, what have you seen as like ways to actually support them in a way that makes sense based on, like actual reverence for this experience rather than pathologizing it?
Yeah, I think so much of it is really just honoring what is. And I think that a lot of the medical model has exacerbated and intensified this anxiety rather than holding it as a messenger, as we said, that
Yeah.
the waters that we're swimming in don't necessarily hold that reverence. So much of just the foundation of the work that I do with folks is really educating on holding pregnancy as a rite of passage. And it's also
Hmm.
important to name that not every pregnancy results in the birth of a child, that
Hmm.
miscarriage is really common. A lot of
Hmm.
folks even experience miscarriage, but might not realize that they have. Maybe the embryo was developing before they were able to take a pregnancy test or something. And while very often, most of the time, this is a great biological safety mechanism that maybe this developing baby wasn't going to survive anyway, or there might have been some DNA trouble there. But that's not to take away how distressing that can be.
Yeah.
So, also
Yeah.
just like owning and naming that that is a huge part of the perinatal experience as well. And that is still part of perinatal nervous system, that is
Mhm.
for bleeding women who have menstrual cycles. They can still have a pregnancy even if it doesn't result in an intended child at the end.
Yeah, and that nuance and that acknowledgement too feels really
Mhm.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that a term that you've shared a lot on is matrescence, and I'd
Mhm.
love to have you share with the audience what that means, how you relate to that word, why it matters so much.
Yeah, definitely. And that seems like a great segue because that really, to your last question of like, how do I bring this in to help folks? Some of the foundational understanding is what is matrescence? And matrescence is this multi layered metamorphosis into motherhood. And as I said before, it can be something that one experiences, whether they've had a child or not, going through that perinatal experience. The term was coined by Dana Raphael in 1975, but it really seems to be having a hot moment now where people are talking about matrescence and what that means. The way I describe it is that it is like a developmental phase, the same way we have adolescence, pubescence, all these different hormonally affected developmental phases. Matrescence is that transition from having no children to one to
Mhm.
two, and it could go on to
Yeah.
however many children someone has. As I'm talking about this now, I'm really talking about it just as a language disclaimer and the way of birthing women who have children, but it also really affects adoptive parents, surrogate parents, step parent, non biological parents. So just naming that the language I'm using might feel a little bit limited, but it does affect others
Uh-huh.
as well as fathers. We can call that patrescence. So it's really just a term to put a parentheses or encapsulate this really seismic shift of experience when one enters parenthood. And as we spoke a little bit earlier about, there are these massive hormonal, biological, physiological shifts. But matrescence also is really affected by economics. Having a child really can change one's finances, socioeconomic status, their geographic location, where one lives, their home, their environment, everything, quite literally everything changes when
Yes,
you have a
everything
baby.
every facet of life.
Yeah, you can't, you have to baby proof your house. You have to rearrange
Mhm.
things differently. So there are very few places that go untouched. And while not every family will be affected in the same way from that experience, there's different degrees of impact from all of these different areas. And
Yeah.
what I want to say about matrescence is that it's this really positive thing, even though that doesn't mean it's always easy. We can think back to how we felt as teenagers in
Mhm.
adolescence, and our identity was changing, our friends were changing, our bodies were changing. And
Mhm.
in some ways, it was really liberating to be a teenager because you're exploring this newfound expression, but it was also very tough. So I want to invite that same sense of change into the idea of matrescence, that it can be really tough and intense, that there can be major emotional waves and changes, feelings of ambivalence, feelings of joy, rage, grief of an old life, but also feelings of connection and community
Mhm.
and unity with this other being are just some different possible ways of experiencing matrescence. But what's really important to note is the neuroplastic effect of matrescence
Mhm.
and motherhood, because the brain is changing so rapidly that there's this really ripe opportunity to repattern our thoughts, our nervous system into a more positive way of being or a different way of relating to the world. There's a lot of pruning happening in the mind of old neural pathways that are
Mm.
no longer relevant or necessary. The sole job, because of that oxytocin bonding between caregiver and child, the sole job and focus is to ensure the survival of this being, the survival
Mhm.
of the human race. And so The brain is pruning all these different ways of thinking and being that are no longer relevant. And all right, full disclosure, that can be really intense when we live in this culture that wants
Yeah.
mothers to do it all. But
Yes.
I want to
Yeah.
spin it in the positive light that there's this way of our brains are changing, so we can really change the way we are in the world and take that as a positive.
Beautiful. Wow. And as you describe matrescence, and I also appreciate that acknowledgement of, though it can sound like a limit of it's just this one experience, it actually can apply to so many people in different types of transitions, not just the birthing mother. But it occurs to me that this is something really worthy of like a ceremonial rite of passage as well, and like ceremonial acknowledgement as might happen in other cultures. But I just think about like our Western culture in the US and how perhaps that massive transition isn't by default honored or held with
Mhm.
the attention and care that it probably should receive. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
The single largest detriment to postpartum women is isolation. This feeling of aloneness, this feeling of having this massive responsibility of caring for a newborn child without support. And
Mhm.
there are so many great ways to get involved with that. If you have a new mother in your life, bringing them food, bringing them meals, really
Mhm.
focusing on the mother rather than the child. There's a saying in traditional Chinese medicine that is to treat the child, treat the mother. And I
Mm.
think that's just
Yeah.
so obvious to me at least, although our
Yeah.
our culture might not hold it that way, but a healthy mother who is well rested and fed and supported emotionally
Mhm.
is just gonna do a really great job caring
Yes.
for their child. It's a really
Yeah.
natural byproduct, so I think that's one of the first ways we can begin to invite reverence and ceremony into the perinatal portal for folks and for those who have resources or even just friends around. I think hiring a doula or having a friend act as a doula. Doulas are generally trained in that postpartum or prenatal care.
Mm.
Some birth doulas attend birth and support the mother emotionally, physically, and spiritually through that rite of passage. So that's one way we're starting to see more reverence for this time period. And postpartum being another great time when doulas can come in and help with baby care. Oftentimes, they might offer massage, cooking meals, just
Mhm.
different ways to really like care for the bringer of life. I think that's
Yeah.
what it is. It's really a reverence for life.
And this is making me think about how in our well, what a like what you've described just sounds so nurturing and nourishing and caring, and yes, like take care of the mother, that is how also the baby will be taken care of. But that we live in a society with just the way our economic system is set up, the lack of
Mm.
healthcare or social
Yeah.
safety nets, a society that claims to care about kids and mothers and families, but just there's so little structural evidence, at least here in the States, that we're actually practicing what we say we care about.
I feel heaviness as I share this statistic, but the United States, where we're recording from, is the only first world country. Am I getting that right? It is the only first world country that does not require paid maternity leave, something
Mhm.
that is not legally obligated. Some folks might have a job that offers that, but it is not legally required in this country to offer paid
Mhm.
maternity leave. And that is
Yeah.
really a bummer to say the least.
Yeah, that's really sad and
Mhm.
also unacceptable, that
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
simply should be a right and just embedded in society and
Mhm.
the way that we relate as humans is
Mhm.
not, at least here. But I'd love to hear just anything else you have have to share about what would it actually look like to center mothers? Why is that so important? And how does that also have an impact on like the overall health of society and the planet?
I mean, my biggest drive in the work that I do is this idea to center mothers because, as we said earlier, the health of mothers is directly correlated to the health of society. And I get a little fired up on this. We can go a couple different directions, but
Mhm.
I think I'll start by saying I want to bring in this visual of centering mothers. Another word that's often used is matriarchy. And I think that sometimes can make folks bristle because we think of patriarchy. We think of this triangular, top down, hierarchical system. But instead of men at the top, it's women. And that is
Mhm.
not what matriarchy is. That's a real misconception. Rather than
Mhm.
thinking of that triangular hierarchical shape, we can think of a circle.
Mhm.
And in the center of the circle are women, and the women are tending to the children. And on the outside of the circle, we can think of men protecting the women, protecting the children. That's a very basic way of describing it. Obviously,
Mhm.
there's different roles and values for everyone, but
Mhm.
really just thinking of it, if we are protecting mothers, we are
Mhm.
protecting children. And if we're protecting children, we're protecting the future and the longevity of our society.
Mhm.
One thing that I learned about in grad school as I was studying clinical mental health counseling, we talked so much about attachment
Mhm.
theory, attachment style. This is an absolute cliche, but like working as a therapist, the whole trope is like, what's your relationship to your mother? like,
Oh, yeah,
um,
yeah, and, like,
and
everything
so
goes back to that right, the yeah.
exactly, and
Yeah, yeah.
I
Mhm.
absolutely do not wanna blame mothers for every problem of a child or
Mhm.
an adult, but there is value to understanding that child-caregiver attachment that we were speaking of earlier. What was missing in that graduate level training I had was any talk about perinatal mental health and how
Mhm.
a mother who isn't well supported, who might be suffering from a mood or anxiety disorder. I'll quickly say
Mhm.
that in the United States, 1 in 5 women experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And that's not
Okay.
to say that experiencing one of these mood or anxiety disorders means your child is ruined. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely not at all. We are very
Mhm.
resilient people. But in extreme cases, when a parent is going through chronic stress or chronic lack of support, because I really don't want
Mhm.
to pathologize this. I really think that when there's a lack of support for the mother and caregiver, there is more opportunity for rupture in the child's caregiver bonding. When there
Mm.
is more opportunity for rupture, we start to have these adverse childhood experiences, or what's called ACEs.
Mhm.
And statistics show the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the higher risk one is at for a whole slew of different things. Addiction, I think for youth, there's like a higher chance of juvenile delinquency, different things like
Mhm.
that. So, kind of drawing this back, when the
Mhm.
mother isn't supported, there's more risk for adverse childhood experiences. When there's more risk for that, there's more risk for crime, destruction, distress in this growing society. But
Mm.
if we center mothers, if we have that
Mhm.
circle of protection around women and mothers, then they're supported to have healthy bonding with children. And when there's healthy
Mhm.
bonding with children, we're really resilient to deal with the inevitable stressors of life. We're
Yeah.
all going to have adverse experiences in
Yeah.
life. That's not
Mhm.
the end of the world, but having that foundational bond and resilience helps us better deal with those potentially traumatic moments in life. And then the ripple effect goes on. That healthy society of children
Yeah.
go on to birth their own children, and that cycle of growth continues on.
Mm. It's such a vivid illustration of the ripple effect, and
Mhm.
also how when we change the equation from, oh, the mother has to hold everything and juggle everything and be every role, to actually organizing our society into a circle where there are layers of support and
Mhm.
people have their roles that are mutually supportive, how that really also heals generations to come as well, and creates more
Absolutely.
conditions for resilience and thriving.
It's really clear when you start to look at things that way that the current model of medical care, of economic necessity for work, returning to work and not getting to stay home and continue to bond with a baby if a person doesn't have maternity leave, all of these different things. I just want to take a moment to really hold that because there are a lot of ways we have to work against the system of what is natural to the human animal. I think I think a lot about how we evolved, and I think there would be that protection around a mother and a child. And there's a saying in some indigenous cultures that they don't say a child was born, they speak a mother gave birth. And I think just that
Yeah.
really subtle shift, instead of being so baby focused and being mother focused, really recognizing that this human body is a portal for life. And if we can tend to it and care for it, we can really start to change these ill effects, this maladaptive society that we're operating in. And that's really where it comes in that we get to help change those things in this community micro level. If someone is listening right now and maybe they're not interested in having children, they're not in that phase of life, but perhaps they know folks who are, a sibling, a neighbor, whomever, I think just beginning to relate to that person a little bit differently, maybe offering them that support of a meal or acknowledgement of what they're going through can really start to shift the tides that have brought us
Yeah.
to this place right now.
Yeah. That's such an important point, that this information is relevant to everyone, whether or not they have a child or are planning to have one, that we all play a role in shaping a healthy society where we all take
Mhm.
care of each other. Yeah. And that language shift is really subtle but powerful, of recentering. So I'll start to wrap us up here and leave space if there's anything else that you want people to know about matrescence, the perinatal nervous system, navigating just all the systems that impact our health, just checking for any final nuggets you might want to share.
What are some last nuggets I want to share? As I'm reflecting on this, there's so much more I could say
I
and
know.
really just talk about the interesting biology and shifts that happen. And what I want to close with again, and I've said it a few times already, but centering mothers really helps heal the planet. In indigenous cultures, there's this idea that the healing we do here and now affects 7 generations forward and 7 generations behind. And we feel that really in kind of how I described healthy mothers and continuing on that
Yeah.
lineage of resilience. And so I really want that to land for folks, not as this idea of putting women at the top and that there's, again, this hierarchical system, but really understanding that when we can care for our neighbors, it really comes back around to us tenfold. And maybe we don't see it right away. Maybe those ripple effects happen in subtle ways, but those ripple effects begin to permeate our lives, the lives of our neighbors, and those around us. And so that's really my prayer and my wish for the world and society. I mean, we call our planet Mother Earth. There's definitely something to taking care of mothers. And I even think Mother Earth might be struggling and suffering
Oh,
in many
yeah.
ways right now. And
Yeah.
if we can just return to that feeling of reverence for life, whether we choose to carry life or build a family, it's really important stuff.
Yeah, the collective impact is kind of infinite when we think about it. So, a couple final questions here. I am trying to ask this of all my guests. What is one way that you like to take care of your nervous system?
Mm. So simple. I love mothers. I love Mother Earth. Every day I try to, first thing in the morning, step outside barefoot, greet the sun, and express some gratitude for the day. And just getting outside to lay in the grass, be held by Mother Earth, touch a tree, proud tree hugger over here. um,
Nice.
smell, it's spring right now as we're recording
Yeah.
this. So I was smelling some lilacs on a walk this
Mhm.
morning, and I think, yeah, we don't need any fancy biohacking to take care of our
Yeah,
nervous
right.
system. But just
Yeah. So
good
much of
old
it is
free
available.
Mother Nature.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, and just remembering that resource is available and making contact with that. I love
And
the simplicity
yes.
of that type of care.
And
Yeah.
I don't, have any statistic or fact on this one, but it is my belief and what I know to be true that just those moments are also healing for the earth also. I think earth and nature, I think those lilacs want to be smelled. I think
Mhm.
that's their purpose and they're there. And so me slowing down and showing up to receive nature, I think it's a bidirectional relationship. I want to
Yeah.
feel the trees and the grass under my feet just as much as the grass wants to feel my feet. And that's how I
Yeah.
how I see things.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
beautiful. That life wants more of the life. It's reciprocal and circular and
Mhm.
interconnected. Yeah.
Mhm.
And finally, where can people find you if they're interested in working with you or connecting with you?
Absolutely. The brand I work under is called Seasons of Shakti. You can find my website, seasonsofshakti.co. I'm also on
Great.
Instagram and YouTube, where I have a lot of free guided meditations, a lot of information to further explore matrescence and different ways to support the perinatal nervous system. And I
Amazing.
also have a free 3-day guided transformation called Calm Within Reach. This is for folks who are currently pregnant, and it's a free 3-day journey to relate to your body a little bit better. There's some guided movement, some journaling, and guided meditations on this journey. And it's all a way to begin to understand the changing nervous system that you're inhabiting.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for making those resources available, and we'll include them in the show notes for people to find. I know that I've gotten so much out of your resources, and what you share in your work really speaks to the universal wisdom of what it means to honor life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for having me, Liz.
Yes. So thank you, Paige. Thank you so much for listening to the Nervous System Care and Healing podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And if you ever have a few minutes to leave a rating and review, it would mean so much to me, and it helps other people to find the podcast and spread the care. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, coaching, or professional mental health services. The information shared here is generalized, it may not reflect every individual nuance, and it should not be interpreted as personalized mental health advice. So please do seek out additional support if you need it. Take care and be well. This is Liz at Nervous System Care and Healing.